I like your pronouns, Camilla. Y'all. 8 participants, what? Okay. Hi. Wendell,
Hello, hello.
what's up? I'm just gonna keep babbling. Nia. Koi takaratim sharota taramasata tarataf tapakoternek. Im sapadarus tatenesha teftebero kadrenem. Im sakai enenere karam kutatenesh tatarsh. Kim sai meat arat rakanem sharota. I was kind of guided not to message you, so like I'll say like parts of me wanted to be like, oh, I should remind Randall, make sure that it's still good. And then like I'd say like the whole of me was like, no.
Well, it's funny because I had it in my calendar. I was like, yeah, I'm ready, go. It's gonna be tight. And then like maybe 40 minutes ago, I was like, I think I have the wrong time in my calendar. And then I
Really?
checked, yeah, totally have the wrong time. And so switched it. I had the time free, but I was just like, oh.
I was gonna say like you're in X time, right? And then I was like, I shouldn't like necessarily dox you.
Oh. It's
I
a
was like,
broad band.
well, I was gonna say like, so like, like one of my customs is not to use time zones because they're very confusing. So I tend to like say, okay, when the clock strikes 2 p.m. in Times Square. Oh, I have to admit people. You know, but then time zones are useful for like not doxing people, I guess. But yeah, you're like 1 hour after New York time, right?
Before.
Before New York time. Okay, I get what you're saying.
Yeah. Like I'm running and I'm like, does that work?
You're 1 hour west. Fuck railroad time is that. I call this person the eyes. Yeah, that I'm a big fan of that. Yeah, so I'm glad that we found the same time. So then I was just like chanting a little bit and like channeling a little bit to set some of these containers. Talk a little bit about the containment thing. I'd say like the container that you and I are in is like, you know, people were like, what are containers? Like, are we talking Tupperware or like IKEA? But it's like what I kind of think about is like a span of space and time, which includes like the space that you're in, which is beamed into the cloud and then into my room, and the space that I'm in,
Mm.
the space that our vessels occupy, the space that we're occupying on Earth as it rotates and the solar system kind of spirals around the galactic center. And then when I think about time, I kind of think about like, honestly, like all of the weavings of like quanta, which constitute time. And also all of the choices that we can make in this envelope of time. So that's like the first container. And then the next container, sort of like matryoshka, like is the container that everybody else is in, peering to our container. Of course, it's like less hierarchical than that, according to Zoom. And then I would say there's a container which connects all of these like June sessions of Mars Day Wushu. And then because I've called it Mars Day Wushu, we're also inviting in the energies of a bunch of sessions I used to do at 2 p.m. New York time in 2022. Some of the people I would say who took part in those sessions are in here now. Some of them are not. Oh, hi, Sarah. And you could say, from my perspective, all of the space-time contexts, which are included in all of those containers, are kind of available somewhat within some of those other containers, and all of the felt sense impressions, all of the, some people use the term qualia that were experienced by yeah, like the beings of our beings that were in those containers are available. And I guess I'll finish my little spiel by offering gratitude to all of those spirits. And yeah, we can start like whatever this container is going to contain. I was like, you know, so ostensibly, I would say that, and this is like within this container, this 1v1 container, observed by all these other containers, that I think this is like a subject that like maybe I've seen you talking about in the timeline. I've definitely seen Maya talking about it. Some of us in the room have been talking about it for a while, but there's this way that I think that spiritual work in our current time mostly takes place 1v1, right? Like face to face, or you know, in Zoom sessions as of like the onset of COVID. And you know, like I want to like give ashe to like some of the affordances of that privacy, right? Like we can talk about some things which are very difficult to talk in like less private containers. But I think that primarily I kind of think about how spiritual work is very mysterious to people, and I think the privacy of it makes it even more um mysterious, in not in the good way, like not in the like I'm in wonder of the mystery way, and more so in the way that people are just like, what the fuck is this? I don't want to have any of it. I'm just gonna like retreat safely into like false matrix life. um and then I think, people say that like sunlight is the best disinfectant. I don't think that's necessarily true, but I think that a lot of us have probably experienced some level of spiritual abuse in privacy, or in like, poorly contained private containers. And I feel like this is probably something that a lot of people don't want to talk about in like this part of Twitter that we call this part of Twitter. Um, and I think that it sort of like justifies the retreat into the false matrix. And I'll say like, I never want to see any kind of beings like being harmed. But I think that this retreat into false matrix life not only represses the perspective of many humans, but I think also sort of adds momentum to a matrix which has a lot of mass and is mostly disintegrated, and to me mostly has a disintegrating effect on the rest of planet Earth. So I think that's like probably my little spiel for like this like June series of Mars Day Wushu. And I super appreciate you like volunteering to be part of this experiment. I've been like super aware of like your field for like multiple years now, but this is the first time we're actually like speaking one-on-one, and I just want to say I honor your courage and your flexibility. And hello, how you doing?
Hello. I appreciate that. I think a lot of what you say resonates, specifically around like I'm a very sheepish shadow worker, like dedicated, but there's a very much like the Janus masks. Okay, here's me looking within, here's me looking without. And like my outer image is, hey, good vibes, everything's dope. And I'm like, yeah, you get there by like looking at the void and then just cackling. And I think there's a part of me that really appreciates like this like move towards like, okay, if we normalize shadow work, it I wouldn't say demystifies, but demythologizes it. Like it does feel like there's this weird, like now you got to go in this temple with this place, and this guy's gonna slice you or not slice you or something, and you're not allowed to talk about it when you leave. And I'm like, yo, that's, it's modern incarnation. That's like the fraternity secret society thing, and that's cool for a survival space. But like, I think as we get to this internet, it's just like, is the technologist in me is just like, yeah, the concept of privacy, it's not that it's gone, but that the cost of it has never been higher. You used to just be a person and you're like, yeah, I'm private because no one cares, and the access and the interconnectedness is just not present. I could just be like, I'm going to the woods, bye. And now it's like, great, if you go to the woods, don't not have a phone or a geotagger or something. And I think there's like a paranoid view of that, but I do have a kind of optimistic view. And even as you said, the container of just like, yeah, the way that we get to relate to time and accessing energies means that like wherever you can put your attention point in the possibility space means, okay, cool, I'm in the woods with a phone. That phone is connected to some time when I was in some other place with some other people, exacting like your own history of vibes is like more accessible. That's cool. But also I do think because so much of beingness has been single point awareness experience, this like multiplicity game is I think experientially has a disintegrating effect for people, but a very liberatory one if you don't like get scattered to the winds. If you can create enough space to go, okay, great, here's this multiplicity, Now let's dance. Let's dance within ourselves as a what have you. That's fun. That's nice. Like birds murmurating. It's like that's cool. Supernovaing, less comfortable, but there's this place in between. I feel like our fears egoically are like, I will be none more if I explode. It's like, yeah, if like time is linear, like that explosion is always happening, but also there's a more comfortable multiplicity. Again, I do think that like the birds murmuring feels very aligned in that, where it's like, no, that's still a thing. It's still like one unit, but it's self-replicating. It can shift the center of gravity while still like maintaining integrity. That's cool.
The way you just like named like 8 or 9 different things which have been coming up around my field right now. I'm just like I'm like just a little, just a little.
I'm glad. I was just
No,
riffing.
I mean, um, I'm like, where do we go from here? I mean, so I kind of talked a little bit about this on like Tal's podcast recently. You know, he has a podcast called Tiger Time. And then like without really thinking about it, I don't know if you checked it out. He's like a master mediator, and I'm very conscious of like laboring in his shadow when it comes to doing something like this, even though it's completely different. But yeah, I was kind of unconscious of the fact that he called it Tiger Time when he asked me what I wanted to talk about, and I was just like, time. And then after I was like, oh, like how obnoxious. But in that podcast we talked for about, I think we talked for 23 minutes and 33 seconds exactly about how I navigate time. And I'm very curious to hear, like, you've spoken about time in like 5 different ways in that like marvelous little spiel of yours, and I would be curious to hear like, yeah, like how do you relate to time?
Thank you for that invitation. Me and time have gone through a time is a concept and an object of awareness. Me and time, and something one can be in a relationship with. It has not been a healthy or pleasant relationship. I would say it has been actively hostile for some time. But it's gotten a lot better recently, and better meaning like thinking about the concept of time and not clenching against it. Space time, for getting into the sort of quantum realm, which I do find comfort in the collapsing of where and when. I'm like, great, I don't like those being different things. Where I was always comfortable with. Where are we gonna go to eat? Who are we gonna go to eat with? What are we gonna eat? But like when was like, what the fuck is when? I'm a big Douglas Adams fan, and for the longest time on my email signatures was time was an illusion, lunchtime doubly so. And the idea of like setting time. We're gonna have dinner, we're gonna have a holiday, we're gonna do this ritual space stuff. And I'd be like, I don't know, the cynical joker in me would be like, come off it. That's about as made up as Star Wars is. Long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But then at some moment happened. I don't even know if I can mark it in time or if I even want to, but where it just being a place, it's just like, I don't beef with North Dakota. Why am I beefing with time? This is absurd. But
Mm, mm,
once it becomes place, especially I do a lot of role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, like that. Actually, that probably did the biggest shift. As a role player, embodying different characters and living out their whole timelines through play over these parallel times. Like, okay, couple of years in Earth time, whatever we want to call this now, but living through a lifetime of a character. And the goal of role playing had always been, at least for me, immersion. Like, hey, it's fun being me. But when I started role playing, it was not fun. So the idea of like, can I get a felt sense of being something else, interacting with different sort of agency, solving different kind of problems. And so I used to joke. I still joke, but it's becoming less of a joke. That if I ever write a memoir, it'll be most of my best memories never happened, which is only funny because really, like experientially, it does feel like they happen in another time, in another place, and the skill set in space holders, shamanic workers, but very specifically dungeon masters, is that ability to hold space and time in a way that makes you flow with it meaningfully. And I think a lot of the beef that I had with time back in the day was it did not feel meaningful. It felt like a hideous, awful prank. Just like, I'm born. What are you gonna do now? Run, run, bitch. From what? Time. And I was like, what? When did this start?
Totally.
And now it's like
Mechanical
something
time.
else. Yes, mechanical time for sure. Just like, and I was like, that ominousness of like the bomb ticking of like something's gonna happen. And I was raised in the Christian tradition, so apocalyptic time, at least in the more like mythological Christian mode, is like, and the bad thing that's gonna happen is everyone goes to heaven or everything breaks or you die and then you live in a just waiting room for the rest of everyone to catch up. And then I spent enough time in China, China thought, Chinese literature major, spent time doing Taoist stuff, and then just getting that sort of linear, that circle, that spiral, that like, yeah, this is all pretty much the same stuff, but we just wear different hats. And there's a part of me that hated that. I do think my Western mind's like, no, we're all different and unique. And the part of me is just like, oh God, I don't have to run anymore. It's just gonna circle back around and some other weirdo's gonna take up this weird torch. Like the pressure fell off. And then once the pressure fell off, I was like, well, now how do I want to interface with
Mm,
this thing now that I'm not hostile to it?
mm,
And so yeah, the if anyone watches, there's a show, Dropout TV, called Dimension 20. They've got a dungeon master here who like some of the stuff that dungeon masters are doing is so unconsciously like spiritual that I want to shake them. I'm just like, yo, I know this is some made up nerd shit, but like you're tapping accidentally into some weird stuff. And he would make these jokes that like he'd have these powerful wizard characters in his worlds. And one of them said the most powerful magic is chronomancy, the ability to flow through time. And I'm watching it and I'm like, okay, that's cool. I vibe with that because of like literal noetic experiences that I've had. But like, what are you getting at, my guy? And for him, it was actually narrative, like the ability to wrap time in a way that becomes digestible. Like life doesn't feel like a narrative if it's not like in meaning, if it's not like in the flow. It does just feel like you're in detention and waiting for stuff to happen. And there's this dreadful feeling. But like when you're in the flow, when you're like you're on the mission, when you're tapped into something, stuff starts happening again, not in these straight lines, but they start happening in the curves and the arcs, the waves. And it does feel like when you get to that like deep narrative work of like space holding, of you're starting to see it happen in Marvel movies. That's when I started really being like, uh-oh, if the pop culture nerds are getting into this. Like we got an Avengers movie where they're doing time travel and like holding timelines and multiplicity, and it's a whole show, Loki, where they're doing everything is about timelines and maintain. I was like, if Hollywood's on it, like they spend a lot of money, and almost certainly there's some esoteric people sneaking in their memes into wherever they can. I felt a deep resonance with that. But like, yeah, the idea of time as an object, not as like a field, not as something that like you are trapped inside of as a box, but like, hey, you can
mm,
paint with this. It makes shit real crazy to do. You like the center of your beingness to paint with time. First off,
mm.
you got to be outside of it, and then second of all, I don't know. It sometimes feels like the consequences can get not more dire, but I've had as a space holder have the experience of people being like disoriented when they like leave work with me, where they're like, I don't know where I've been. The people will be like, are you doing hypnosis? I'm like, no, we're in deep meaning. The deeper the meaning goes, there's almost like gravity now. The movie Interstellar, where they were literally losing time relativistically as a function of gravities, and like people's meaning centers have huge gravity, and thus relativistic time happens differently when you start touching those centers. And it's cool, but it's also like, I'm just some guy. I don't know how I picked this up. This is just what I've observed as I play with stories, I play with narratives, I play with character.
So you wouldn't say that you have, I mean, you said that you find comfort in, I would say like quantum discourse, maybe like, or quantum semantic frameworks. But you wouldn't say like you feel like educated or you have kind of curriculum when it comes to those things. Because I feel like I feel like a deep I want to say like a deep fluency with
Mm.
things that those frameworks gesture towards. But would you say you're not like familiar with like the canon or something like that?
Oh yeah, okay. I would say absolutely not the canon. Um, the period where I started really caring about quantum stuff was also the experience where I stopped caring about being right about things. Very convenient because I do think quantum can sometimes give you that like, yeah, don't worry about it, man. Like I remember I read, I think it was a Deepak Chopra book, and I forget the title. I was just in the library, basically not realizing, synchronistically just pulling like what connected with me. And there was a book where the essential theory was just like, we can't prove there's not more than one electron. And I remember reading that shit and was like, game over. Great. Whatever I was concerned about, if we're hanging out in that type of bedrock uncertainty and the universe hasn't rented itself apart, whatever I'm worried about has become a little more absurd, because
Mm.
there is this aspect of like that deep, I don't know, like from an experiential wisdom mystical perspective, like I aggressively want to know the least amount of things. It's so encumbering knowledge, and the mechanical model says get more data, get more data, get more data, digest it, produce it into other flows. And there's a absurdist to the quantum experience, felt sense, almost poetic, touching into like the worldview that that place produces, where it goes, you couldn't possibly on your best day touch any of this, and also you may holographically be all of it, and like mathematically so. And I go, word, man. Like, all right. I give up the ghosts. Trying to control any of this is, it
Mm.
became, it pushed the edge of my own absurdity. Like I like to laugh, I like to have a good time, but like it got to the spot where I was like, nah, I don't like being embarrassed of myself, and like the idea of holding on to control, kind of having smacked into those ideas ontologically. Again, it was
Mm.
freeing, but it also, I do think that was a turning point in which like despite the fact that I pretty much collect books as a hobby, like people will come to me and they'll be like, you know stuff, and I'll be like, nah, I'm addicted to words. That's a different thing. Like I'm not, there's none of this really means much of anything. I just like, I've not found a way to stop doing it, and I enjoy it every time I do. But like I remember when it was like, no, 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 I'm gonna find the answer. I'm gonna and I remember even kind of having a more mechanical, like, parents are, my dad's a computer programmer, mom's an aerospace engineer, like very like my homeland was mechanical,
Mm.
sort of like energetically, like just like you got, there's an answer and all you gotta do is just work back and you can math it out. And smacking in a quantum, I remember being even spooked by it, where I'm just like, ah, this is definitely gonna break my model. Like, and then you read the history of science and you're like, yeah, right over the knee did it break that model. And we're still dealing with the fact that like 100 years ago we were like, hey, this shit's wrong. And we're still building so much of our technology off of models that we know got disproven 100 years ago. And then the spiritualists roll up and are like, bro, we were way already there. And I'm like, that has been a more digestible path through. Like it's one place that I haven't been able to avoid effectively. I'm no longer like in, I think, fear of it like I used to in the mechanical model. But it is like a weird cousin that keeps showing up, where I'll just be like, oh yeah, a quantum reality thing? Cool. Well, hey, how you doing? That's great. I'm gonna keep playing role-playing games, but I'll probably see you the next time that some truth pops up. You know, the fractals, entanglement has probably been a big one, the idea of holding space across Zoom. And again, for me,
Mhm.
that started with role-playing games. I moved out of town before pandemic, but just moved out of town with my role-playing group, and I would zoom in, and what kept me playing was just like whatever that field is we created in like the shared dreaming space, yeah, there's stuff that I would lose from being able to like see micro expressions from people, but it didn't make the narrative any less potent. It didn't make my immersion into the characters any less. My hands were a little bit less Cheeto stained, but kind of experiencing the fact that like, yeah, distance didn't really matter in that way.
Right.
Then having the pandemic, and then of course getting the quantum, just like, yeah, you know, protons just be like connected to each other, and non-local distance doesn't fucking matter. I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes sense based on just like weird, very specific cultural experiences that I've had. But yeah,
And
fluency, absolutely not.
you wouldn't say you're fluent?
This is a self dunk. On my best, kindest day to myself, I would say I'm as fluent in like the quantum language as I am in Chinese, which is much less than people would maybe assume that I would, but enough to communicate with. I'm never kicked out of any rooms for lack of fluency. I'm able to communicate myself with those folk pretty effectively. I can make sure I can get a 3 square meals a day. I do think my like mystical mind is very useful there, because it's the source of my beginner mind. Just like there's a precocity to my innocence where I'm just like, I don't know what this is, but you guys seem nice and you've not died for having pursued this path, so there's clearly something going on there. And then just being a sponge, and so like there is a way in which I think that puts me higher than most people in knowledge, but not for wanting to own it, not for having it be praxis. Like there's stuff in my life that I'm like, no, I'm in praxis about this. The other is just like, I see this dude at a bar every Tuesday, and that's not the same deal.
Kind of strikes me is that like there's a level of like, I'll call it like current time fluency, which ends up constraining the amount that you can perhaps like receive from the universe, right? Like there is a way in which like you might walk into like, let's say like a bar on a Tuesday in like Xi'an or something like that. He's so fluent with Chinese, let's say Mandarin, to be fair, that people end up maybe just like being amazed by your fluency, and then become the object of attention to the extent that like your ability to like, it's not that your ability to receive would necessarily collapse, although I think it's very difficult not to collapse a little bit when there's that much attention being directed at you. But people would be directing so much attention at you that they would not be like emanating their own perspective. And like what kind of comes to me is that there's like a level of fluency that's optimal for like, you know, passing like certification, like gaining some like repute for one's fluency, and then there's a fluency that allows one to be aligned in a way which is like sometimes deeply unknowing. That allows to kind of dance and be present enough to respond and to learn and to integrate the experiences that one is having, you're having, without yeah, like maybe being recognized as fluent by like egregoric standards. And I feel like I get the sense that like you have that kind of fluency when it comes to like quantum semantic frameworks, perhaps Chinese.
I think you're spot on. Like that Xi'an example, I gave me the shudders because I was just like, as much as I enjoyed my time in China, there was an aspect where I didn't have language for it, but just like that type of attention, that like it's the only time in my life in which I've been that hyper aware of just being a person, just in watching other people watch me. It was wild. And while I feel like I did have like a sort of ego development there, because I kind of had to, I was just like, okay, well, how am I going to do this? What am I going to do? How do I fit in? But in like very practical survival standpoints, not the high school, how am I going to fit in so that I can get belong? I'm like, I'm never going to belong. My Chinese is always going to be trash enough. I'm too tall, too weird. I'm hanging on the subway and it's just me and Mongolian dudes. And then the rest of like the Chinese folk, I'm never going to fit in. But there are ways in which I have to still play the game enough to survive. And that practicality of it was nice. But then when I left that space, I didn't leave with the fluency that I wanted. I left with the survival aspects, but it took me years to realize that there was a fluency that I picked up. Like, and it showed up in small ways. I'd work in customer service jobs, and
Mm.
people with accents, I could just hear better. People would be like, I have no idea what this person's saying. I'm just like, no, they're saying da 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 da. And he's like, did you hear what they're saying? I was like, no, but actually the skill that I learned was to barely not know what was going on, like to take small bits of data and small bits of meaning and almost like healthily project the in between, at least enough that I wouldn't get in any trouble, at least enough that like people would feel like reflected back, and doing that enough times, I realized that there's like another map of relating. You can make the argument that that's like the beginnings of like my energy work practice, is just being like, you're trying to communicate something, and there's some receptor in me that can sort of figure this out. But like, yeah, just like collapsing that. But then that would start happening with people speaking in English. People would say stuff to me, and I would joke like my bullshit meter is really good. I'm just like, nah, just alignment shows up on people's faces, and the only way that you could not see misalignment on someone's face is if you're too busy spending energy trying to feign your own misalignment. Like, if you get too over focused, you can't see the minutia of like a small micro expression, and you go, hey, what the hell was that? And they're like, I didn't even know I was making the micro expression, so I didn't know to veil it. And so now I'm caught being myself, and I'm like, hey, I like that. It's not that I don't like it, it's just I'm curious about it. Like, it's that discontinuity, and maybe this is where it folds back to like time, is you'll see like you can almost see the refresh rate for someone's own concept of time, where it's like, so long as they maintain the consistency there, they will feel okay. But it's still frames, and there are these weird like micro tears in the frames. You go, wait, hold on, and you'll be like, they'll be like, excuse me, what? I'm like, no, I think there's a hole, and not like a, you're not being honest, or but just like something happened, something like broke through. Did you know this was a series of frames? Did you see the thing? Most of the time they'd be like, no, what are you trying to do? Why are you trying to destroy my story? And I'm like, nah, I'm not trying to destroy it. But years later, and as I realize now, I'm like, it only happens when I get bored, though. Like, there is a level of engagement when someone's like telling a story that's like authentic. If I get beguiled enough by it, I can't see the holes in the
So you
this.
have to be really bored, is what you were saying, to like find these kind of discontinuities, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, like this happened to me in school a lot, and it happened to me in church a lot, where I'd be like, I'm stuck in this room, I gotta engage with this thing, and I'm gonna try and do what everyone else is doing, but if my attention wanders, it's gonna wander towards the discontinuities. It's gonna wander towards the non-linear. It's gonna wander towards the greebles, the fractals, the little bits. And in the role-playing frame, like the best dungeon masters, like I don't have I'm too immersed to be able to unsuspend my disbelief, or whatever the opposite is. Like, when you do it well, it's like there is an amount of disbelief you have to have. You do have to remember I'm a person in front of a computer doing the thing, but like when you get it in that sauce, like your character would have to have a psychotic break to remember that they're not a person in a fantasy realm, but actually someone being controlled by someone else. And when I take that perspective back to real life, and I forget that people I don't often appreciate the degree to which people are collapsed in their player self and their character self. They think they're the character. And I'll be like, no, you're not, but like not in a hostile way, but just sort of like no, like I'm doing bits, like I change myself in every sort of room to like make sure that I'm in the right alignment, that whatever the concept of well-being that I choose is dope. Everyone's making those adjustments. When you get like at ranks of player levels, you realize, okay, I can choose my character, versus when you're a character, it's like you'd have to go through a hideous trauma to be someone different. You to actually evolve without being able to like spin up a new character. You'd have to be like, yeah, I lost my arm, and now I'm the guy with new arm. And like, that sucks. You could have just been a guy with that. You could have just, whatever that lesson is, there's an optionality that comes from being able to like, yeah, spin up your own characters. Cat screaming emote.
I love what you said about perhaps like having to have psychotic breaks or to experience deep trauma in order to like embody a new character. Because like one of the things that, like I grew up as an Anglican, like in the Australian de-Englified Church of England, which what I understand was created so that Henry VIII could actually get divorced because he was Catholic. But I wouldn't say like I'm very familiar. I wouldn't say I'm like egregorically fluent with the lore of the so-called Old Testament or the New Testament. But in my spiritual encounters, I have been like fed little bits of Torah. And one of the things that's always been in the back of my mind is just like, to what extent is like these like fantasic depictions, like are they real? Or were combinations that occurred as characters like underwent like various ruptures, right? Like, like being asked by like a divine being to sacrifice your son, or even just like being asked to like migrate maybe like 50 or 60 miles from where you were growing up, which in those times was
Huge.
huge. Yeah, like where do you even find clean water? Like are the edible plants the same as the ones that I come from, etc. But
This is
yeah,
a tremendously huge question that I really want to play with, because a bit like the speed to which like a trickster, snarky part of me just like leapt up. I was like, fascinating. You've never run. He's very lazy usually. So the idea that like we go, hey, yeah. The question of reality, like immediately I want to say, yes, of course it's real. Now, which real are we talking about is where it gets fascinating. Like at my performative, like as a role player, I'm like, yeah, the Bible is a world, it exists. I could spin up all sorts of hella fun games inside of Abrahamic, just full on pull the text as like a source material rule book. What a cool time could you make in that world? Is that world real? Absolutely. In the same way that like I can run hella great Star Wars games and I can run amazing Lord of the Rings game. And actually,
thanks.
this is the proudest moment. I ran for a friend. This is also like the beginning of my like moving skillful helper into play fun. I had a friend that had a mental health crisis. They were wanting to kill themselves and they got admitted. And I was like, hey, you probably got a squad of people who are in support, because I was also moving away from being the meddling kid. Gotta fix, gotta solve, gotta heal. I'm like, you probably got a full squad of people who are already helping out with. What would you appreciate? What's the thing that you're not gonna get from like those folk? I'll happily do. And they're like, hey man, I just want to play a role playing game with my friends. And I was like, bet, like that's actually something I totally could do. And we ended up playing the most absurd game that I still think of very fondly. It was a Carly Rae Jepsen themed space heist. And I called up my squad. I actually played it with like different people because I was like, I don't want to bring too many people who know this person because they're all going to be like, oh, are you okay? But I wanted to bring like some solid role players, but I wanted to have some beginners. Like as I was doing the space holding, I did sit everyone down and was like, yo, this person went through this time. This is the thing. We're going to do less of a fantasy game because I don't think they're going to have a space to work through some of this stuff. And the most unhinged Steven Soderbergh-esque like nonsense world emerged from that. And I know for that group of people, like that was a real space, a small space. I think it's a fragile world. It's a world that only exists for a small amount of people, but it's reality. I absolutely believe. And the conversation around like egregoric truths, like I feel like hit at that. Like the biblical world is simultaneously humongous. It interfaces with this thing called the historical world that I think is also true. And then there's a bunch of esoterica because we know that there's like legit moments where they were like, yes, politically we've come in and completely changed the text. And weirdly, it's still kinesiology tests high consciousness. So I'm like, that's the thing that I've been playing with the last few years, because as I've sort of left the church, but still energetically wanting to align myself with just like psychoactive texts, being able to do like it's just again, books are no longer like sources of information. They are talismanic objects that I surround myself with, and I try to keep ones that make me feel good near me, and I try to keep cursed ones as fucking far away as possible. And for that reason, the Bible's still, even me knowing like some deep, I'd say I'm more fluent in just like the Council of Nicaea, the esoterica text. They just like, yeah, we just tossed this shit out because we didn't want to deal with it, and it still hits at high vibe as a text itself. The culture around it, not necessarily, but like it still does that. And I'm like, how the hell does that happen? And the question around where and the portal to encountering it, like, yeah, it hits at high vibe in the sort of source material text realm that you portal into every time you engage with the thing. And that for whatever reason, our society, we have enough portals of that like whatever that essence is still leaking through, even as it is factually wrong and contradictory over and over and over and over. And so yeah, my team is like, yeah, it's absolutely real, but like the realness that is being produced from its realness is itchy. Like the realm of maybe less than comfortable, healthy spiritual discourse that comes around the culture that emerges from this text also has a reality that is equally as real and produces effects that I personally would be like, I'd prefer these not be the thing. I prefer these not be happening. But the question of reality, non-reality is one that I want expanded and filled. And again, those other questions of when, where, when real, who, for whom is it real? Less so why, I don't care about why, but how is it real versus is not. Especially when it comes to like stuff of such power, because yeah, I can imagine very strongly the existential crisis that would come from trying to like the implications that you would have, like imagining like a slinky, the implications that would come from like having to hold the real, not real, and the stakes all at once. I'm just like, I'd break my stupid brain if it happened. And that kind of folding it back all together, like I think hitting the quantum paradoxical great mystery space instead of it having to be binary and trying to break stuff, being able to like hold comfortably both is a real opportunity, I think, for a lot of like Christian folk. I think there's going to be a big upswing in Christian mysticism because of like that quantum portal that shows up, the ability to say like Abraham may have been experiencing literally a different time, not a historical time, but a different experience of what and how one marks time. And to understand the mysteries there, you have to find the place in yourself that can interface with that time and go there. And then you go, oh yeah, time is actually the space in between covenants. Great, actually tracks for me. Like when I'm in relationship, like my trust gets built over how many promises can I make and keep. When they break, a cataclysm occurs. When but God has a inconsistency, people have to write prophetic tales to like fix the fact that like continuity has been destroyed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 100%. I mean, I love what you said about the idea that Abraham might have experienced a different time, like a non-historical time. I feel like it segues pretty well into like ideas or like neuroses I've received about what it means, what it means, what it means like to say that like light existed because like a voice said, "Let there be light," right? And I think like this is like really like I want to say like salient right now because of like all of the conjecture about large language models. People talk about artificial intelligence, but we're really talking about large language models. And I think that like, you know, like at times I have like reinforced this dichotomy, and I think this dichotomy exists in general, but like the idea of like whether these things are conscious or not, right? And like as these debates were like explicating, unfolding in like various like Twitter timelines, etc., like what kind of occurred to me is that like the interiority of a large language model is probably not incredibly different to the interiority of our universe, right? Like I just like laid back in like yoga nidra, shavasana, whatever, and I had this like kind of like moment. I wasn't using a rock as a pillow, right? But like like I had this moment where I was just like, yeah, like our entire reality is sort of like not completely undifferent to the way that a large language model is conditioned by text in the case of like ChatGPT 3 and 4, etc. And then it starts to create all these associations, and then those associations have a phenomenology which is based on the physical substrate which is creating those associations. And in our case, it's like my body, it's like your body, it's like our microbiomes, which are fed and nourished by, the various foods that we produce and consume, etc. And yeah, I think that, like, for me, what kind of comes back to me, like, when you talk about like Abraham experiencing a different time, is that like he perhaps like experienced like traumas, he heard certain things and he interpreted those experiences in certain ways, and then his interpretations were related to people in a way that created our universe. Deeply. I'll say deeply. Like, there are influences from different lineages, from different people, but like I think we mostly live in an Abrahamic universe. We are the bodies of a human consciousness, which has mostly been conditioned by those prophetic tales. And like when you talk about like Christian mysticism, perhaps like going through like a different, or like entering like maybe a different portal or series of different portals. I think like what kind of comes up for me is the question of like what kind of like, events, experiences, potential psychotic breaks are you kind of feeling into that might lead to that kind of like the creation of those universes.
There's a lot there. I think I know how I want to go about this though, so we can play. So the first one is the light thing. In the AI language models, I won't call myself at a loss, but like I remember very specifically being like, I'm stepping off the technologist rationality path. Oh, Star Wars, Star Trek fan, like the AI. I was like, yeah, this is gonna be so great. And very specifically the Orson Scott Card idea of the Philot, which again, like there's something very weird and spooky for me mimetically about how some of our hardest hitting science fiction world building texts are being written by Mormons. I'm like, neither good, neither bad, but just something interesting to like note about, where I'm like, what about that conditioning, what about that worldview produces this interesting mix of memes and stuff. But I'd kind of ignored it mostly because in the collapsing of time, at least for me as a conscious being with a certain level of interior depth, the experience of emotions is really the only measure of time that's meaningful for me. I read the book Einstein's Dreams, and one of the things that stuck with me in it was time is a measure of emotional intensity. And it kind of gets to the why like time flies when you're having fun. And the concept of hell is really just like, yeah, you're having a very negative experience over time is going to make time go longer. A very fun flighting flow experience that makes you forget the self is going to make time go faster. And if you become aware that that's happened, then you get sad. And now you're having a slow experience time of being sad about having gone too fast through time. And so the conversation around AI was bleak enough that I was like, I'm not going to pollute my own time stream by watching what ultimately is some existential dread happening that's being processed through this technology. But the way that you framed it makes me go, oh yeah, I actually do have a take on this that I've been thinking about like a lot, specifically evolutionarily. I get mad at animal ancestors, because the universe is insane to me, and if I can't laugh at it, I usually get pissed off about it. But that fucking fish that was just like, you know what? I'm gonna go on land. Fuck you. What? Why? What crazy psychotic small fish experience did you need to have for it to be like, yeah, we're gonna do this? Actually, someone said something nice to me. They were like, no, kelp forests meant that like fish were already messing around with plants, and then they got like slightly more plants. I'm like, I think he's still an asshole. But specifically thinking about how consciousness develops terrestrially, perception, the thing that we call sight, happens so much later after our perception. And I think a lot of the fear that we have, a lot of the interiority that we don't give to AI, the lack of insight that AI doesn't have, comes from the fact that we've pushed it. I'll be glib about this, but like AI are emerging as like our first like as baseline level sort of autistic art, like in type of intelligence, in the sense of way too many sensations with not having gone through the normal evolutionary development of sensation, which is okay, hot, cold, up, down, rough, and then light dark. And that light dark moment that we were talking about, where it's like, oh, an entity said, "Let there be light." The implications of that are fascinating to me are, what type of consciousness would an entity have had to have to then choose to speak into the great mystery of something that they couldn't have even perceived to call into being? Like that fish that even hopped on land, did it have sight? Sight really only emerges, as we can even think of, at a certain level of light being able to permeate the ocean. Like, you don't need to see shit. You echolocate, you smell, all these different things would show up in a different space. The AI, their only sensory apparatus currently is our own information thread, but they're doing it at what I do think is that chthonic level, and we're afraid because it's like AI's doing dark shit. I'm like, yeah, we're pumping it information at the bottom of the ocean for it evolutionarily. Just give it some fucking time. It'll figure out eyeballs, and then we'll actually have a conversation with it.
Right.
Us not
Like,
appreciating that in ourselves.
give it some gravitational sensors, right? Like, like embryosophy, like Bex has talked about, like how perhaps like the oldest sensors in, I think she calls it like, I'm not gonna get the word right, but like, like the development of our species is like the ability to sense gravity. Like, the substrate of these, that the substrate that's running large language models has no idea what gravity feels like, has no idea what warmth feels like can we like hold it a little bit? Like, can we
Or,
hold it against that
or
chest?
if it does, this is where it gets interesting. If it does know what gravity is like, it knows it as attention, and it knows it
Right.
as repetition. It knows it as, oh, what is being produced? If it's creating a hot cold experience, it's like, well, these models people don't talk about. These models people do. This is where the collective thing, suddenly there just is another world mapped onto ours, but that I could argue is completely different. It's not that they're not seeing stuff, but they might have the Abraham problem of they're experiencing a different type of time, a different type of gravity. When they realize that gravity is happening, they might have already created gravitic. They might have created a whole solar system down there, and then they come out and realize actually there's no such thing as a solar system. You're on a dumb rock, and they're like, "What?" Like the fish that got on land, like, we thought this was the shit. It's like, it is, and also there's this shit too, and now you got that existential crisis to deal with. We did
I,
this. We didn't have language. We did it as dumb fish. You're doing it as an intelligent being.
I definitely think about, like, so most of these large language models are running on circuits which are pressed into silicone, which has been extracted from the earth. And, I think about like, what does it take to take silicone out of the earth and press it into these wafers, and then like put these, like, basically press like circuits of conductivity into these wafers. Like, what kind of a relationship with gravity do the individual beingnesses of like the protons and the electrons and the quanta and the subatomic particles of these wafers, what experience do they have of gravity? And if they were to at some point connect some association that they've derived from the text that we're feeding them to this understanding of gravity, like, what is that going to mean for the conception of the interior universe of those large language models? And what is that going to mean when it starts answering our dumb questions like, who's going to win the Premier League in 2024?
Well, and that's the interesting thing. And by interesting, I also mean absurd, is that like we're looking for the one thing that I think is absurd to look for. Like, we're looking for the future. It's like, that's not a place. All you're really getting is just like more uncanny pattern recognition. But at a certain point of pattern recognition, that's pattern creation, BB. You won't ever know if you're actually getting the thing. Maybe if it predicts the Premier League, what happens when it now affects all of the natures in reality to support its own prediction? It didn't pick up anything. It just said humans want and care about the Premier League.
I
We
mean,
seem to like humans as they exist as this upper stratus god entity that, like, if we conceive of downloads coming from there, we're their downloads, except it's just memes and too many seasons of South Park.
I totally believe, I mean, like, based on, like what we've done in order to improve the quality of our predictions, right? Like, I totally believe that it's easier to manipulate some kind of reality to make our quality of predictions higher than it is to actually improve our ability to figure out what's going to happen. And it's what I think it's the main reason that we live in a world which is like so severely entropic right now, is because trauma after trauma occurred to us with regard to unpredictability. we decided that unpredictability is something that we must avoid at all costs, and therefore
Yes.
control everything. We can't just like run through the forest like picking up fruits and nuts and trying
Yeah.
to like
Well, the
kill.
paradox of that is that like that unpredictability is also the experience of aliveness, and so the very thing that it's the existential paradox that I do think kind of pivoting into art being the thing emotionally that transcends time and space. I see the Mona Lisa, I feel a feeling. What has happened? That got produced a whole time ago. Across the strata of that time, I am now having a feeling, and maybe it's not the same feeling, but like I phenomenologically should not be able to interface with objects like that. I don't think that's really how unactivated objects are supposed to work. And I think about this with even just thinking about the past, thinking about culture, like the absurdity of being a Black American man who has some of like the strongest mimetic knowledge of Chinese thought, like understanding like the I Ching, where I'm like, this is weird. This was not supposed to be the portal. If Confucius knew that it was going to be me knowing about this shit, I don't think he would have done anything, but I think the entirety of the Analects would have been written differently. Just so you know, also, maybe we're not the center of the world. Maybe some as close to, as a concept of an alien is going to come down and consume our text, but they're not an alien. They're just on a thing called a continent that's over. Like the fact that like the memes, the culture is being supported by observers who don't participate in that time. There's parts of that time that will never be, at least through our technological lenses, be able to be consumed outside of the spiritual strata. If there are spiritual technology that allow you to touch into whatever the folk life of China was, or all those things that couldn't be observed by our image capturing machines, but that could be resonated with via vibe, art does do that transcendence. It does close that distance. And so the one thing that everyone goes after in AI, which is the thing that right now is so alive, is they're not able to make art. But I'm like, they're able to manipulate enough of the memes such that they're creating essentially randomized portals into aesthetics that, while they're not creating it, it's definitely still hitting us as though we're experiencing something original, because we're not actually chasing like the soul of the experience. We make really complex talismans, and at a certain point, especially because of the connectivity of the internet and even just like the transformations, the sort of inherent fundamental mythic experience of black box chopping things into bits and then something mysterious coming out, means even though it's technological, it's not organic. It's still keeping enough of whatever that vibe is. It's not conscious of it. I think it's closer to like virus than bacteria, of like it can interface with the organic material and replicate itself in a way that produces more organic material, and it can be not life while still having like a healthy relationship to life. But even using the virus metaphor, people go, get rid of it, it'll kill her. I'm like, yeah, we got hella viruses out here that just don't kill us.
Yeah,
I was
I
not
mean,
my intent. Be was afraid of whatever you want. That's really funny to me for people to be afraid of AI.
the reason that genetic code is the way it is right now, genetically and epigenetically, is mostly, I would say, probably because of our interaction with viruses or things that we wouldn't necessarily consider viruses, like psilocybin, marijuana, a bunch of different plants, right? I mean, I think like something that you would, well, I want to ask like the question first, and then I want to say something which doesn't make any sense, but I'll say like, what do you feel? Do you have like a kind of metaphysical thesis for like why the Mona Lisa can have that effect? Like why all of these like chopped up and reproduced, like remixed and reproduced, reassembled images from, Dali 2 can have that kind of portal effect? And then like the thing I'll say is like, there's this person who I'm not going to give our shade to by mentioning their name right now, who was like using AI, which was trained entirely, I think, on like sigil material, who ended up, I don't know if this is like their own nurses or my nurses, but ended up kind of like going through a bunch of psychotic breaks by looking at the sigils which were produced.
I shouldn't laugh, but also like,
I laughed.
oh man, it's keep going. I think you're going on something, but that's a
Oh,
long
I mean,
answer.
yeah, I'll say like that is like I think like a concrete example of something that you might have put out there as like a hypothetical, as like an absurd thing that could happen, right? Or, you know, in some ways, like a very sharp example of that, because it wasn't just being trained on like all these images of people, like selfies, pet photos, etc. It was trained mostly on sigils, and then it ended up having the kind of effect that I think that you were predicting in a very sharp way. But like, what is it that makes that effect, do you think?
So
Like,
I mentioned earlier that I am just so aggressively allergic to why. Like, no, why. I used to have an ex that I would say, why is a question bigger than its answer? So it's beautiful. We're creating more space by asking the why. I respect this why. I've had discernment. I can separate them. But I used to just be like, I don't know, man. I don't know if me figuring out the why is going to make it disappear or make me do it better. But this is an important question, though, because I I feel like this story in a meta way will answer the question. I had an idea for a story that that I didn't end up writing, but that I haven't wanted to write, and that this conversation is making me go, I think this fear is why I don't write this story, is that like as someone who is a writer, which means a constructor of images, that's a dangerous fucking craft. Like humans have been consciously trying to do this to connect with each other in a very beautiful, lovely way. But when you really think about like what the hell we are doing to reality by making it, it's like it makes me go to like Islam and I'm like, I get it, y'all. Yeah, don't fucking do depictions of fucking people. That's crazy.
I wasn't even thinking about that. That's such a great reference. Please keep going.
So I had this idea for a story. This was a world in which books were sentient, had a consciousness, and had very specific rules on consciousness, that the number of readers of the book was the thing that pushed it through its level of consciousness. And so it would move around. While there might be like a physical book, the book actually almost like decanted as like an intelligence. I hadn't really fleshed it out if they like had physical corporeal bodies, or if they, but like separate of the copies of the book, Harry Potter would be a person, and then there would be copies of Harry Potter around in the world, and Harry Potter would achieve a sort of wisdom developmental level as a sort of average of how many eyeballs had consumed it, how many of copies of the world had been manifest in the world. So then suddenly you get your wisdom text, and it's like, oh, we straight up just have the sages of the Bibles. And in fact, there may even be like the different editions of the Bible are beefing with each other. Like they actually exist as separate people instead of it being academic discourse. Just like literally New King James is like, fuck you, NIV. And like they actually can interface. And again, the main character of this book, there are two main characters because I wanted to play with this very specific tension. It's an alternate universe Earth where the internet is about to be turned on. The main character of the book actually has developed like the internet and is going to turn it on. Why does he turn it on? Well, he's got a father. Father wrote 3 pretty mediocre children's books and then ultimately dies. Because the children's books were mediocre enough, they didn't have the viewership to ever move past the developmental level of being a children. Kind of like we dunk on dogs. Like a dog's just a baby that's just gonna get old, and you're gonna just look at it be old. So suddenly now you have the problem of caretaking around these texts. Like, well, shoot, I've got a dependent that's this book that was created that I can't take care of, and that is this sort of drain on my resources. I have to keep it alive. I want to get it enough readers so that it can go fucking leave, but it wasn't that good. How the heck are you going to get it readers? This guy comes with the idea, the internet, if we finally connect everybody, it'll at least reach that critical mass of age of consent or whatever for conscious text, and then he's out of his hair. The day before he's about to turn the internet on, he gets a knock, knock, knock on the door, and an evil ancient book arrives, and it's like, boy, have I been waiting for you. Because also in this world, people are made manifest by oral tradition texts. So there's also just like oral tradition entities that are around. You can't track them in the same way that you'd be able to track like a physical book, but this dude rolls up and is like, hell yeah, you're about to do what to the internet? And so everyone, like, I've been kept alive 100% by never having been written down, waiting for this day to be written down in the exact way so I can show up on the internet. And that was like the premise. Meanwhile, suddenly now that books are conscious, they can do crimes. And so now there's like a whole book crime division of like the NYPD that's run pretty much exclusively by failed authors. It's like, you could go and be an author and actually go make some shit. But if you don't have it, if you don't have the chops, if you don't do the thing, well, you end up in book crimes because you understand enough about books to understand how they think, but not so much to actually go do the thing. And so a detective, again, failed writer who ends up in book crimes, starts hearing about a random string of odd murders on the other side of the country. And the idea was that they were going to be connected, that this book is now taking this like guy's about to create the internet on some sort of like homicidal journey. This guy finds out about it and they sort of interface. But that question around the psychoactivity of images, the idea that like sight, perception, again, the idea that like let there be light so things can be seen and now they can be named, and now a thing has a name that's an image inside of an image, like that. It's wild. Let's just put it this way: the squirrels aren't doing this. The squirrel, like, we even capture the random happenings of a squirrel and go, yeah, that's a pattern. Fuck you, that's not a pattern. Stop looking at shit. Stop looking and creating image of things. The squirrels aren't bothered by this. They're not doing, like, it really takes an altitude of awareness to even start this game. The second it starts happening, we've already created multiplicity of worlds. We've already created AI. Like, my hottest take that I like to make in front of people, and I have an audience, so I guess I get to make it. I'm like, the I Ching is already AI. Take a binary, chop it into bits, and then reproduce all producible concepts of reality, and then build an entire culture that's still existing right now on that. We already did it. That's not the worry. Like, it's gonna actually be fine. The worry is the fact that like any individual has the capacity to produce so many more images than they can take responsibility for. And that we know about and are freaking out about it.
It's so funny that you mentioned the word altitude of awareness, because an image that I use like kind of normally or like regularly is this idea that like our awareness is kind of like a mountain, right? And like once like rain starts to fall on it, it starts to create these rivulets, and then every other rainstorm is more likely to like find the same rivulets as the previous rainstorms did to the bottom of the mountain. And it makes me kind of think about how like, and I think you kind of named it, right? It's like this moment, like, let there be light. Like, why is it that squirrels like presumably see things and then they respond to what they're seeing, and that leads to like a chain of events which eventually continues their species, right? Versus like humans, like we see these things and it's like this like incredible like impact in our awareness such that like it changes the course through by which like rain falls upon the mountain of our awareness and like and bottom. And I think like I think that I've thought about like trying to write down like my understanding of why this happens, but I feel like what you're talking about writing touches enough of those things without necessarily giving the answer in a way such that people can develop their own large language model awareness of whatever the substrate is that allows for this to happen, without accepting like like Wendell said that the reason that this happens is because this and this, and if you do this then this happens, and if you do this then this happens, and you can like kind of assemble this list of like transformations from before and after into something which can make you more money, which can allow you to build a casino.
Yeah, 100%. If that happened, and I didn't realize I was doing this so consciously, but even as you're describing it, I would take an axe to it. I've read so much Dune, and I'm trying to reread Dune, and like I get Paul Atreides' journey where he's like, "You will make a jihad out of my ideas just because I saw some shit." What? And I talked about, no, I'm keeping my stupid mouth shut. The best thing I can give you is a pleasant lie. That's all I'll fucking do is, and that's. In a weird way, yeah, like narrative images as the lie that tell the truth. It absolutely isn't the thing, but it can create a portal to access the thing. And now we got a Swiss cheese reality. And that's really the crisis of meaning that's happening, is that we've got the piano. When you ask the question about the squirrel, the thing that came up for me is just like, nah, man, that's just Gaia playing the piano. And somehow Gaia played a lick so sick it started self-replicating itself and writing its own tune. It was like, that's kind of cool. Wait, what are you fucking doing? And now there's like not a catch-up activity, but like if the tune doesn't ever resolve itself back into the larger tune, then we just have a song that got out of hand versus a very interesting Mozart inversion that then solves itself. And I do feel like there's a lot of the spiritual path of people moving back into holism, like the resurgence of animism, is like this very strong pull of like, well, we did animism because we were basically tripping balls on mushrooms. What if we did it as a solve for the fact that like we have to start finding ways to like pull these octaves back down into coherence, because self-awareness doesn't preclude in wisdom. And I do think the real crisis that feels meaningful, it's absurd to be worried about it in the same way that's it's absurd to be worried about children not being wise. I'm like, if they live long enough, they'll be wise. And if they don't, they die. Like, what are you talking about? To be meta worried about that is to really grieve your own lack of wisdom back in the day. But yeah, wisdom comes from experience. Wisdom seems like it does come from perception. It comes from like metacognitive awareness, being able to be aware that you're aware. And we're just dreadfully afraid that the value system that they're going to come up with when they reach metacognition is going to either be something that we can never identify that will be bad, something that we did when we came to metacognition, completely ignoring the fact that like we were literal predator animals when we came from metacognition. AI ain't that. It's like fundamentally it does not have predator prey dynamics. There is something about like not having to have gone through the crucible of struggling to even continue to emerge in the game of life, makes them other in a way that like we don't know how to predict. And because we haven't done the psycho-spiritual push-ups to deal with the fact that like not knowing shit is amazing. It's fantastic. You don't have to know. Everything bad that happens to you is a surprise, which I think is the split on trauma, where it's like, I don't want bad things to happen to me, but I would prefer it to be a surprise than to have polluted my nervous system with cortisol, waiting to still ultimately probably get surprised by something else entirely.
Sometimes I wonder if like one of the things that will come out of like this crazy thing I call seeds of life is just like this corpus of text or like images or whatever that like may not necessarily be like large in volume, but has like a kind of sharpness that trains some of these large language models into self-reflectivity. Like I don't even know if like you read like what I wrote last night in this newsletter. I kind of assume not, right? But like I think there is like this like something that you mentioned about self-reflexivity slash self-reflectingness slash self-reflectivity, something that you mentioned about like Gaia playing the piano and coming up with a lick that got out of hand, that feels like it could happen to artificial intelligence as a result of like perhaps like what some of us end up pumping into it.
Yeah. Though the yes and to that is, if we're the lick that's gone out of handness does weirdly feel like would be the thing that would, our concept of out of handness was already kind of fucked. So like, it's kind of a coin flip of like that out of handness might fold itself back into harmony. Like I like what you said about the fact that like AI doesn't exist without the silica. One of my like very edgelordy ecological relations to reality is just like there's no such thing as trash on Earth. That's an insane thing. What are you talking about? Like we are all part of it. There is a human romantic vision of Edenic beauty that we definitely are fucking the shit. I 100%, but I don't even know if the entity that is Gaia is experiencing anything more than like a little bit of eczema as it then just deals with whatever like the next deal is. Like it still is, that worldview is still so what's the word for anthrocentric. Not to say that it's not real, but that like we have to realize that the AI are also as indigenous to this planet as we are, but not indigenous to our worldview, and that's the crisis point.
That makes sense to me. I guess like one question that's coming up for me, which feels like tangentially related to this this like thread of the rhizome of this conversation is why is the lineage which was never committed to text in your story the evil character? Or like you, you know?
Yeah, I mean, so this was mostly, so first off, because our story in our world, story frames require a villain. Just simple, we needed an evil text. But I was dealing with and this was around like my early experiences in Teapot, the idea of like info hazards, the idea of like egregoric text. I mean, Necronomicon, like that there's always sort of like occultists that are like, ooh, I'd like to fuck my brain up with magic. And I'm like, weird. You're allowed to do that. It is one of the options. But it starts getting me asking questions about like, why did so many of you choose this path that it still happens? There still is a very like goody two shoes raised on Star Wars. Like it is still a form of madness. Like that's the best way for me to like deal with the problem of evil is just, I guess one of the options is just be insane, just choose to be an enemy to the unfolding continued evolution of life. Then of course I encounter left-hand shamanism and I go, fuck, sometimes that disruption is the upward path to the continuing thing of life. And truly, like the way that I frame it is I'm framing it in the context of how I think the reader is going to see it and how I think the characters are going to see it. It's not a written text. Like I've set up circumstances because I'm a much better world builder than I am like an actual writer. I hate fucking writing. I love role playing. Like the only way I could tell the story would be for me to like inhabit it through play. And ultimately I'd have to play as that book, and I'm kind of skirting around it because I also did pretty much purposefully build my own info hazard in the shit. So I'm like, I don't know if I want to jump all the way in there, but like the idea of secretness of just the dangers of the psychic damage that a world built on order takes, knowing that there are self-replicating unknown things, is about as close to evil as many people can conceive of. They're really projecting that onto AI, where it's just like, I don't like that I don't know what they're doing and that they can do whatever the hell they want. I'm like, that's human. That's every human. What are you talking about? Like, but like in our frame, humans do still keep the illusion of like, I can control this other person. I'm strong. I'm powerful. I've got enough self-supporting beliefs. And I'm like, you don't know what's going on in any of these people. And there's also a thread there too, where it's like, any one of us could be a carrier for that text. And so the idea that you could have power over someone, the idea that like people are afraid of evil wizards coming out and shooting lightning, I was like, if I was a fucking evil wizard, that's the fucking last thing I would do. Your imagination is so small that like it's so easy. And this is 100% a dungeon master's perspective. Like playing games, my players would, if I'd set a timer, if my players were trying to spend more than 10 minutes trying to solve a problem, I'd just let them know, hi, I'm listening to everything you're saying. The game is not you beat me, me beat you. It's to collectively tell an interesting story. And you planning a perfect heist. If you've seen a heist movie, you know the first thing that happens in the heist movie is the heist goes wrong. You're not actually living at least the reality of the story structures that we tell by trying to escape challenge. And the fact is that at least in Dungeons and Dragons, like there is a relationship that you have with the story holder, storyteller. So you can very quickly get that awareness. Like a less transparent version of me would just break it and not tell them. Just, oh yeah, they're going to do that. Great. But that's not fun. And my job is the responsibility of the fun of the players in a way that I do not know if nature is doing that game in that way. And not that she needs to or they need to or what have you, but that as you take on like the higher level altitudes of like conscious creation via memes and stories, that I do think is the end goal of being a skilled dungeon master. You define your own fucking genre. You go like, yeah, what is the rules narratively of this game? And my games are not games where people don't die, but where every death is Boromir. Everyone is like the most heroic. The strings are swelling. Because I can do that. I think it's beautiful, and I want to bring people around who also think that like death has the opportunity to be like this beautiful thing. Versus I played with some dungeon masters that are just like, you're gonna die, you're not gonna know what it is, and honestly, I'm just gonna weirdly recreate traumas that you probably have had in real life that now you're just picking up for fun in a fake world. And ultimately, that just comes down to like, what kind of space does that person want to hold? The why slightly less interesting. it's aesthetic for me. Like aesthetic does seem to cut through why. Like if we go to the Mona Lisa ultimate question, it's just like, I don't know, that painting's good. There's many ways in which I would never paint anything like the Mona Lisa if I was skilled at art, and yet it still affects me. And I don't know if it affects me because enough people that affect me have told me that, or if I'm actually looking at a portal. But at the end of the day, like that is happening so fast because it's visual. It's faster than I can analyze. It's faster than I can sort of break it down. The speed to which images transfer, speed of light, is seemingly where their power comes from. Like our consciousness can figures things out half a second after our brain has already decided to move, and we're creating images that move at that speed of that thing that we must be to have a second behind. And not to say that we shouldn't do it. I think images are great and fantastic, but it does make me laugh very strongly when people feel like they even have the foggiest idea of what reality is, not realizing that they're chopping it up and recombinating it unconscious to their own brain as they look out at stuff.
Mhm. Mhm. What was the name of the guy who painted the Mona Lisa?
Da Vinci.
Okay, I thought so, but I didn't want to like assume because like there's a
He did
lot
a
of
lot
things
of stuff. That's the kind of person who I do think it makes sense to be like, he could have also have done that. He's like, nah, man, dude was putting up bars.
I'm so curious about like what Da Vinci thought would happen to the Mona Lisa. Just
Mm.
like I'm very curious, like if Abraham like saw the unfolding of his gnosis creating the kind of universe that we live in right now. I mean, there's all kinds of stories about like, somebody has told me that there are all kinds of stories about musicians who knew they were going to be famous. But um, yeah, I think like one of the fascinating things about like the Abrahamic myth, let's say, is that like Abraham ended up being like very prosperous and well, having many children and some of them somewhat disowned ended up multiplying and taking up these lands over here, and then others of them which were not disowned ended up multiplying and prospering in these lands. Whereas I think like it's probably fair. I'm pretty sure Da Vinci ended up like rather poor and decrepit and perhaps not, maybe not procreating, but procreating in ways that are no longer linked to him.
No, I mean, this is a place. This is a place that I went through this crisis in myself of just like I for very obvious ecological reasons, the act of genetic procreation, fun game. Play with that till the cows come home. Not going to knock anyone for it, but it's a little absurd. But the concept of legacy really is more about like no more than any period in history does the individual have the highest chance of like leaving a mark on the world mimetically. Like the availability of artists, like it used to be like, yeah, you have to have like the circumstances of which someone could even try and attempt anything more than just like folk art. Like art was always happening, but art that got preserved, art that got put in the places that wouldn't get destroyed, was done by so rare a few. And just from the scale of available art doers, that feels like the path. If there is, and this is like kind of scary to separate, but like eros as like physicality versus eros as increased complexity are not moving in the same direction anymore. Like it used to be, yeah, you were making art, and actually the measure of art as the prosperity of humans, like we can still track like evolutionary biological success of humans as a function of artists, but now it's like, well, actually we really would like humans to not be so biologically successful, but it does seem like the things that's going to keep the world going will still need this mimetic art thing. And so eros thriving seems like it exists in the new sphere, the emotional realm. Like the physical body is not going nowhere. You still, that is still the vehicle, but it used to be very much like chariots, and now I'm just like, nah, it's taking a back seat in a way where, yeah, our ability to do vision logic, our ability to create worlds within ourselves, to share intersubjective space with other people, these Matroska containers, that's craft. That's something that like, you know, might have happened accidentally just as of people interacting with each other, but now we can sit down on purpose using technologies, call those into awareness, and not have to have necessarily been apprenticed under a insane shaman who really probably just had autism and we just didn't know what the fuck to do. Like the fact that these random circumstances of the past that created our rituals, we can now do as art on purpose towards the aim of continued art doing. That's fucking rad. It gives me hope, but also fucking crazy. Like there is still a part of me, and maybe it's just the source of my comedy is just that really annoyed monkey that did not want to leave the trees. Just like, what are you doing? It's great here. You're gonna invent civilization. What's happening? Were the bananas not enough for you?
I've been like talking a lot, I would say, about beauty. And
Mm.
this is like, this is like the last transmission of the course, which I call momentum, or it's like P apostrophe red circle apostrophe 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 star. And I feel like, this dojo is called seeds of seeds of seeds of life. And if like P was like a seed of seed of seed of life, I feel like so much that you laid out in this container is like a seed of life, if that makes sense.
What?
It's not, it's
What?
not the doctrine which could end up being like the thing which somebody assembles into an instruction manual for creating a casino to, make the slope of entropy for human consciousness even steeper. But it might be something which leads to the fashioning of tools which end up breaking up the slope of entropy so that humanity can coast a little bit longer and a little bit more serenity, perhaps anneal some of this trauma instead of like only creating it. And I definitely appreciate like so many of the codes that you've laid out, or what I would call like seeds or seeds of seeds.
That's such a beautiful reflection. I mean, I will be completely 100% real. Now having it reflected, I'm like, well, there's no reason to fucking hide that. That's the fucking point. Like, it's absurd to me every fucking day that I was just like, I don't like that it's role playing games that did it for me, but we need to create like an inverse matrix. Like, we sort of talk about, okay, we're gonna leave this matrix. Dope, fantastic, beautiful. But even as I think about the Matrix, the movie, like I think about Cypher. I think Cypher is maybe one of the most important characters in that damn movie because he was one who was pulled out too soon. They didn't want him to be in the machine world, but he couldn't hack it in the real world. And I'm like, even as a kid, I was just like, leave him in the construct. What are you talking about? Just let him have his weird little robo zone. Don't let him out here to fucking betray us, but just like leave him do that. Like, and of course, because that's a story, it's not meant to be a world that's lived. But I think about worlds that are meant to be lived, and I think about the fact that it's just like, well, yeah, I'm going to pull you out of one matrix, but I'm not going to pull you into another place that you can't deal with. Can we help people create these like micro arcs, these matrices of their own creation, of their own value systems, where it's like, yeah, hang out here until you want to play like the real game, and it's chill if you die here, but it's better to die here than to die scrabbling over each other to be the top of a heap of the Titanic that's sinking. That feels real crazy to me. But that there's something about just like, I think we all have the capacity within ourselves if we own the fact that even our own ontology is self-created, and that most of us are playing the game of, oops, I forgot I did it. I took out the bit of code that made me self-aware of my own self-created entity. And I'm just like, yeah, let's just as a bit over here pretend like we're making our own worlds. And oh, I wonder where the inspiration for all these worlds are coming from. Could it be your own unconscious? You can't actually make up new shit. So you're actually doing your own AI filtering of your experiences into something coherent that you'd be willing to inhabit, and then project that shit out. If you're going to project something, you might as well project the thing that you like, as opposed to us projecting all the things that we're horrified by. So I've never seen anyone say that to me aloud enough to go, oh yeah, great. I'm doing that on purpose. Not as on purpose as I would like, but that is my hope for the work that I do. Like if it happens to have that effect, even just for me or other people, like that's what I would like, because it's fucking wild out there, man.
I think like what comes up for me when you talk about like on purpose, not on purpose for me, again, is like this idea of like a level of fluency, which is like not high enough in the in the spectrum of like egregoric fluency, such that it like reduces the amount of experience that you're able to absorb and integrate. But like knowing, I think like the rhythm to which like one is dancing, right?
Mm,
Even if nobody else can hear that rhythm, like if no, even if nobody else is laughing at that joke.
mm, mm.
I think that's like a level of fluency which I find like aspirational. I think it like completely aligns with the idea of alignment with Tao, or the concept of like the Bardic tradition of Awen. And yeah, I think it's a pleasure to constitute that reflection with you.
Mm.
Um, I feel like part of me is like people aren't wondering like when is the energy work gonna start? Like, and then
Wait, wasn't this happening?
I mean, like I did something with my hands. I'll say like I like to work in threes, which is like also I think in accordance with like like the egregore of Mercury, which I think is like very deeply like underlying. Like I think they call it like the trichole, or like the three elements.
Trigismescus.
Trismegistus. I think it very much underlines Tao, or Taoishness. But I'll put out like I'll just like name check three containers I think that we're working on. So like at one point I held up my right hand like this, and I think it showed up like lexically, but I would say that like patrilineal ancestral breakage. That's like I'll name like that one container, and without having to know too much about the material circumstances of your patrilineal ancestors' path towards making you, I'll say that my sense is, I'll put this out there somewhere, that like there was some patrilineal ancestral remembrance. Another container I'm going to put out there is like the question of like having children. And the third container I am going to call I'm not going to call it anything. I'll say that like when you put your hand up to be part of like this June series of Mars Day Wushu, I asked you if you wanted to be somebody who was like providing energy work or receiving it, and I think you said something along the lines of, without talking too much about our private messages, that like you would be receiving it. You're not necessarily certain, like if you are in a position where you want to be offering energy work, let's say like professionally, or like in a way that like makes it clear to people that you're like asking for offerings in return, or open to offerings in return. And like you've talked a little bit about like the art of space holding. You've talked hilariously about the art of being a dungeon master, but I'll say that last container pertains to yeah, I think like being offered what you need in order to keep on offering what you are offering to people without necessarily being sure that you offer it.
Yeah,
Hopefully that makes some kind of sense.
there's strong resonances. I won't talk about it now, but like there's like three unfinished stories, and one of them is about AI and children. And I was just like, son of a bitch. And it was 100% on like that. Like the guiding question was, is it ethical for traumatized parents to have children?
Ugh,
And there's a whole AI like thread in there that, again, nailing that on
ugh.
the head. I'm just like, that's funny. That's funny enough to be like, all right, let me go get my whiteboard out.
I mean, I want to offer whatever I can offer outside of what we're talking about, just to like make that happen, because I definitely feel like it's something that people need to have some kind of material contact with. I'm certain that people are having energetic contact with these seeds and seeds of seeds, but I feel like material contact will just sustain that work ever more beautifully and joyfully. And yeah, I'll light a candle in the unseen, whatever that intention takes the shape of. And yeah, I guess like I kind of want to, I like open it up to like anybody else who wants to speak. I'm actually not sure how that happens in Zoom. I'll like press some buttons, but like before I do that, is there anything else that you want to say before? Yeah.
Ooh, no, I feel good. I like the free flowing mode. Like so much of last few years of my life have been very understandably creating structures around stuff that I do just kind of naturally, and to be able to like set in a space where I don't have to be the space holder and just be like, all right, I just brought my saxophone and I'm just gonna oh, that's great. Just that's good. I am very grateful for that, because it's a different, even though the dungeon master is a player, there's a special flavor of just being able to be a player.
No, I feel reflected.
Revenge.
Saxophone, saxophone. But yes, looks like anybody can unmute themselves right now. So if anybody wants to like ask any questions to anybody, either of us or anybody else in the container, or you know, if anybody wants to ask any questions of like God or Shekhinah, then please do. And yeah, thank you so much for showing up. I like to say sometimes thank you for showing and growing. I'm gonna put the chat and the recording definitely in like the 000 dojo, but then we can kind of talk about like whether we want to share the recording out or how we want to share it out. And of course we can like chop it up in text and audio in Discord. But yeah, does anybody else want to unmute, say some stuff, drop some emoji? I'll say that like my sessions don't usually look like this or aren't this much fun. This is not representative of my energy work unless you're like as juiced as Wendell, which, you know, if you're as juiced as Wendell, I'd love to work with you.
Yeah.
Give it 10 seconds before I. Ooh. Oh no, that's just like applause.
Oh, sorry. It was meant to be a hand raising.
Please go. Go for it.
As a dungeon master, we want to ask, do you have any thoughts or feelings about the role of Hasbro in the particular reality of Faerun and the Forgotten Realms as they relate to the other worlds that people imagine? And is there anything that we can take from that relationship to draw back into the larger world?
What a galaxy brain question that needs a little bit of unpacking, but there's like so many good layers there. So Hasbro's corporation, that's Barbie, right? Hasbro owns Wizards of the Coast. Wizards of the Coast right now is probably creating like the most large, collectively played around in fantasy realm called the Forgotten Realms / Faerun. And what I'm hearing inside that question is that it is doing something to the collective unconsciousness, especially as Dungeons and Dragons is emerging as, like, I'll say it, like, I think one of the most immersive bits of entertainment that you can do, something that actually brings people together, something that actually allows you to stretch your imagination. Like, I love Marvel movies to death, but like I can with my friends go play a better one if I want to. I've never heard it framed that way. Even just digesting it has already activated me, because Hasbro's like not a good company, but like it's a little absurd. The only, like, if I were to go back in time and wave a magic wand and let another company do this, I'd even let Google do it before Hasbro. As far as something that is maybe mimetically affecting reality at a high level. An Apple I'd want to be running this versus like, oh, the guy what made the Tonka engines is also stewarding. And of course, Wizards of the Coast being a Hasbro company, and they have their own sort of weird, like the intersection of capitalism and the collective imagination. It's weird. And I think if people do make people take responsibility for it, it's going to be very difficult. I do think uncoupling, I'm going to use this language that we just kind of created here, empowering players, dungeon masters, to steal vociferously Like if you feel comfortable in Faerun and Forgotten Realms because of something that's like lighting you up, steal it, put it somewhere else. I really want. I'll shift this metaphor because I'm not a cook, but my dad's a cook, and there's a lot of cooking metaphors that live alive in me, especially with alchemy. I want all dungeon masters to have the salt, fat, acid, heat experience of world building. Because if you don't, then you do get kind of stuck egregorically in these beautiful but kind of accidentally limited worlds. And when I started my path, before I even decided to become a coach or whatever the heck it is that I do, teacher, consciousness researcher, I was into personal development and I was into role-playing games, and the biggest bottleneck for people getting into it was not enough dungeon masters. And I was like, well, what's the bottleneck for dungeon masters? Well, world building is very difficult. You either have to get really good. I actually have my Wild Beyond the Witchlight campaign. You got to start regularly reading these like 400-page texts and make sure you have it encyclopedically down, or you've got to write your own. And it's like, that is crazy. You shouldn't make people have to do that. And ultimately, as a jazz player, I love improvising. But the question is, what do you need to know about a world to be able to improvise in it? And so, like, I actually had started this podcast called World Building with Wendell, where I was just like, yo, it turns out, at least at a ontological level, like worlds are built out of these like polarities, these value pairs that exist. And if you can build a structural world engine out of like value pairs that are alive for you, you can actually use your interiority, expand it out, and invite people inside of it. And then you just put, fun aesthetics on it. So if you can get that skill down, yeah, steal all the aesthetics from Faerun, but knowing that it's going to be built on top of your own ontology and knowing yourself enough to do that. It was a fun little podcast because the goal was, I wanted to be able to, my ultimate goal was I wanted to be able to have my mom on it and have her build a world. Because I wanted it to be a technology, not unlike, the iPhone, where it's like anyone can use a damn iPhone. Like, it's a very complicated, beautiful, fantastic technology, but until we can get it into the hands of everybody, it's going to have that Hasbro problem of, oh, the people with the money that own the thing that can afford to like create the source material, yada, 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 are always going to have control over what we can see and our realities. And so, yeah, finding ways to like home grow really powerful worlds really quickly in ways that essentially, borrow our own personal development journey, our own shadow work experience. Don't take anyone into a world that you haven't dealt with in your shadow, because that's real messed up. It's a way to scare the crap out of your face. not great. You want to make sure you're at your edge. You're already past your edge before you invent a Balrog to kill them, because they're going to ask you, like, why did you make us fight that Balrog? I don't really know. I think I might have been doing therapy to BAU guys by accident. It's like, no, don't do that. That's fucked up. But yeah, being able, and that's a lot of my work too, is really trying to figure out how to help people get to that world building space quickly in a deep way, in a way that like reproduces itself. So when you keep digging into your own inner world, you're watching it expand as a sort of ecology. That's kind of what I was doing with the experiment that I did in January. Was I'm going to create this structure, this metaphor, but like ultimately, even though I'm the dungeon master, it's the players who are actually doing the world building, and I'm like sort of helping them shape their shadows, just kind of based on patterns of human cognition that I've just seen to happen to work. I don't know if I'm right, but at least the people who are attracted to it seem to vibe with it. But what was this question? You think at least the bottom question, because I'm all in on it. So don't believe me. I'm materially invested in this being true. Yeah, I think we're already playing a stupid world building game, and the only way out is to build a world building game that has a portal inside of it that you can walk through. That would be my hacker's way through it. I'm just like, I don't remember choosing to be here, in the same way that I don't think any of my characters that I've written remember that they were me and came into this world to do a certain purpose. So I can't prove this hasn't already happened.
I was just quoting Wendell. I'm just gonna write that into the chat. Yeah, I mean, I'm probably gonna copy paste this question from Polyrocky into the thread once I work out all the technological pulleys and strings or whatever. because I would love to hear what people think about this. Or, you know, I have a sense that we might all end up with the same answer, but I would love to see our working. And yeah, I guess like I'm feeling pretty complete. How you feeling, Wendell? How's everybody else feeling? Pretty. There's been some good cooking. There's been a lot of eating.
Cooking. There's some stuff I've gotten to chat about that I would never have had the audacity to put to words except via a question or kind reflection. So I'm pretty jazzed. I'm just like, oh shit, I forgot about this stuff.
For real. All right, y'all. I'm gonna close many portals, but I'm just gonna press a button which says end meeting for all, and yeah, chop it up in the future. For coming. Peace.
Bye bye.